Hello, everyone. This is Pastor Bryan. It is Saturday afternoon on, oh my goodness, got to look at the date, April the 4th. Saturday afternoon, April the 4th. And as we are preparing for worship tomorrow, even though it's going to be worship online, it's going to be another one of our online services. I wanted to offer a brief reflection to let you know where we're going to be going in terms of a lot of our online ministry over the next few weeks. I know that it is a really weird time right now, and that many of you are dealing with sacrifices that you're having to make, difficulties that you're having to endure that you didn't plan on, that you didn't ask for, and that it's hard for you, it's hard for the people around you. As I think about, we've got Palm Sunday coming up tomorrow. That's what's happening tomorrow. I had even purchased a bunch of these little crosses made out of palm leaves, and I'm not really sure what to do with those right now. And so this is an unexpected time that we're all kind of trying to weather. And that's why I wanted to make this message. This is a brief message to help prepare your heart and my heart for tomorrow, for Palm Sunday together. Because it didn't really feel right to do this kind of celebration aspect of Palm Sunday that we might normally do. Even as I think celebration amidst a time of difficulty is really important. We are meeting online right now, as you know. And a question that's come up, not just from me, but from a lot of other people, and not just at Grace, but at a lot of churches, is this online meeting. Are we right to call that church? Is that essentially online church? Is that what that is? And I would say no. We can call it worship. There are lots of other things we can call it. We can call it helpful. But is it the same thing as church? Or is it basically the same thing as church? Is it close enough to the same thing as church? I would say no to all of those. That's not the same thing as saying it's not important. But the word church in the New Testament, the Greek word actually means the assembly, or the people called to gather together. The people called to assemble together. So as long as we're not an assembly, which right now we are not a church properly speaking. Now, again, that doesn't mean that what we're doing online is worthless. With online services, a lot of important stuff is happening, like ministry of the word, which is very important. Prayer, singing, all those things are important, but that's not the same thing as the assembled people of God. It's not the same thing as hearing one another sing. Don't you miss that right now? It's not the same thing as fellowship in person, as being edified by each other, as eating and drinking together, the flesh and the blood of Jesus at his table for the forgiveness of our sins, something that we're still going to try to do tomorrow through a kind of parking lot communion. And so what we're doing here with these online services is good, but it's not the same thing as the gathered assembly. It's not the same thing as church, properly speaking. So what do we call it then? What on earth do we call it? And the reason why I wanted to give this short message to you today is because the Bible actually gives us a word for this. The scriptures actually give us a language to express this. In the history of God's people, there is a biblical word that we've been given to express dispersion and lamentation and waiting for the day when we will come together again, when we will be a reconstituted people. And that word is exile. Exile is so much more than just a physical displacement from home. And we can see that in Psalm 137, verses 1 through 6, which I'm going to read to you now, and it'll be on your screen. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. We sat down by the waters, we sat down by the river, and wept when we remembered Jerusalem, when we remembered Zion, when we remembered being together. And now we're dispersed and we're in exile. And then what happens? Verse 2, on the willows there we hung up our harps. We hung up our instruments. They might as well be broken instruments. For there, verse 3, our captors required of us songs, our tormentors mirth, that is joy. They required us to be joyful, and they said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. Sing us one of your happy songs, rejoicing in the Lord, because you are his and he is yours. And so then verse 4 comes, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? How shall we sing Yahweh's song in a foreign land? So you have their captors, their oppressors are saying, sing us one of your songs. And they're saying, we can't, but why? Why can't they? It's not just because they're sad. They're saying we can't because right now we are not God's people. That is, in a sense, of course we still are because we have his promises, but we're not in Jerusalem. We're not in the temple together. How can we be God's gathered people if we're not gathered together in God's temple? And when I think about this idea that on the trees we hung up our harps, I don't know about you, but I find it hard to sing right now. Because it's easier on Sunday morning to sing in a room full of other people who are singing. I'm not saying that we don't sing at all. We do, as you know, we do put singing on Sunday morning in the services that we're streaming, but it's harder to sing right now. We're a singing church, and so I'd imagine that this time of exile has been especially hard for some of you. It's hard to sing the Lord's songs in a foreign land, in a foreign context, in a strange place. And then you have these verses, like verse 5 and 6. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth if I don't remember you, if I don't set Jerusalem above my highest joy. In other words, let my right hand forget its skill. Let me be worthless. Right? All the things that I'm doing are not worth anything if I forget. Because then all of my service, all of my work, all of my energy is going to something else other than being a part of God's kingdom. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. That is, let me be miserable and look, let me not talk a whole lot because my words aren't going to mean much if I can't speak them and share them and have them enjoyed and even critiqued by God's people. We're speaking and preaching to one another, loving one another. But if I'm not doing that, let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. Let this misery just rob me of my words. But what's the thing that would bring that about? If I don't remember Jerusalem, if I forget Jerusalem, and if I don't set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Why? Because that's a temptation. That's a temptation when you are in exile. There are temptations that are unique to exile, particular dangers unique to exile. You forget that you're going home someday. This really becomes your rather comfortable new home. We should never forget that it was during the time of the exile that a couple of new theological clubs, a couple of new theological groups got started up. One was called the Pharisees, and one was called the Sadducees. Those groups got started during the exile, while Israel couldn't be together in their temple, while God's people couldn't be together in Jerusalem. And so what's the point there? My point is that I believe we are in a time of exile. Or at the very least, I believe that the theme of exile is really useful and helpful and necessary for us right now, because this is a time where, if you'll let me speak metaphorically, we must not forget Jerusalem. We mustn't forget what it means to be the church, to be the assembled, gathered people of God. I am convinced that one of the false teachings that will come out of this time, you will hear it. It will go something like this. You know, when all the Christians were quarantined and on stay-at-home orders and we couldn't be in a building together, we did online church and, it was pretty good. I liked it fine. I was moved by it. I felt the Spirit move. So that's pretty much the same thing, right? Pretty much just as good as being there in person. I don't need to go to church. I can just watch it on my TV now. I'll just keep doing church online. The problem with that, of course, is that church online is not church. It's ministry of the word. Okay, and it's guided prayer, perhaps, guided song, but it's not the church, biblically speaking. And that's part of why I think the concept of exile helps us to stay focused on where we are and on where we're going. Now, I do plan, in case you're curious, I do plan to continue with the Matthew series for the rest of April. That's the plan right now, to finish out Matthew in April. I'll be preaching some from Matthew on Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday as well. More on that on Sunday. But I do want to take some time in all of our online services for the next few weeks, for as long as we're in this, to reflect on the concept of exile together, and to reflect on being in a time of exile together, and waiting for the day when we gather together again in our temple, so to speak, back together for our gathered, assembled worship of God. And, it's with that very idea in mind, I called up my friend Kiefer Likens. Some of you know Kiefer. He went to Grace for a long while before he and Crystal moved. And Kiefer made a graphic for us a few years back, and you recognize it. It's right under the picture of me right here. But let me just kind of blow that up, and then I'll shrink down my video box here. But that's kind of functioned as our church logo. For the last couple of years, I think. It's sort of the image we've used to identify ourselves and put it on our newsletter and website and different things like that. And I called Kiefer on the phone this week, and we just spent some time talking about Psalm 137, about this concept of exile, about this imagery of a brokenhearted people weeping by the river, hanging up their harps on the trees, unable to sing the Lord's songs. And I talked to him about how this exile concept was going to help us for the season that we are in, the season God's put us in, the season that the Lord has called us to. And after we hung up, he called me back later that day, and he gave me something. Let me show it to you. He gave me this, which was something that he put together for our church. And you can see in it a lot of the same imagery that I've talked about. You can see a harp. It's actually a broken harp, symbolizing that we're broken and scattered right now. You can see the image of a tree in the background, and you can see a curved line on the bottom representing a river. And for the next few weeks, while we remain under all the difficulties of this pandemic, in fact, I'm just going to remove my image here. For the next few weeks, while we remain under this pandemic, this is going to be our flag, our banner, if you will. It's going to remind us that we are right now Grace Presbyterian Church in exile. It's going to remind us that one day we're going to be restored to being a church together, and in the meanwhile, that it's okay to let this time be what it is. It's a time of waiting. It's a time of lamenting. It's a time of prayer and fasting and trusting in the Lord. And so you see, this exile concept gives us a way to talk about and think about and understand where we are right now. It's also going to help us to look forward to the future, that one day our exile will come to an end, that we're going to be back together again at 4900 Jackson Street, that we're going to move then from a time of mourning to a time of feasting, to a time of gathered services, and why not? Let's do a couple of hymn sings as well, and prayer meetings and potlucks. And I want us to share the Lord's Supper together every Sunday in a row for as many Sundays as we've been apart. So right now, this is our calling right now. Grace Presbyterian Church in exile. We lament, we wait, we acknowledge it is hard to sing the Lord's song right now. But we're looking forward. Every time you see this picture, I want you to remind yourself that we are looking forward to our day of feasting, to our day of celebration. And in the meanwhile, we do take that creeping threat of false teaching seriously. And we say we must never forget who we are. We are the assembled people of God. We are His Jerusalem. And if we forget Jerusalem, let our skills be worthless. Let our words be worthless. If we forget our gathered fellowship in the temple, nothing else matters. Let's go ahead and forget everything else. And so when you see this, remember, say, no, we're not going to forget. We will wait. We will wait patiently. We will wait for the Lord. I hope this has been helpful to you. My goal is to help prepare your heart for the online service tomorrow morning. And so God's grace and peace be with you until we meet again.